Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Professor Bimal N. Patel, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Shri Ram Naresh Prasad Singh, Dr. Swardesh Singh, Mr. Piyush Khandelwal, distinguished guests, and online members. Welcome to Sardar Vallabhbhai Jayanti celebrations, with the theme being Sardar Patel, a man of action. Vallabhbhai Jawaharlal Patel, properly known as Sardar Patel, was an Indian politician. He served as the first Deputy Prime Minister of India. He was an Indian barrister and the second leader of the Indian National Congress, who played a leading role in the country's struggle for independence and guided its integration into a united independent nation. Today, India pays homage to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel with the great statue of unity at the banks of the river Narmada in the state of Gujarat, with the Statue of Unity being the tallest statue in the world. Today, our first guest speaker is Dr. Swardesh Singh. Dr. Swardesh Singh is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Delhi. He is an activist, teacher, columnist, and a proud nationalist in the pursuit of civilization state called Bharat, an ex-JNU ABVP, IIMC, and a journalist. We welcome Dr. Swadesh Singh for his remarks today.
Thank you, Shrishti ji, for this introduction. And I would like to thank Dr. Chaitanya Prakash ji, who is Director of Cultural Center, Durban, South Africa, for inviting me to this August gathering on the occasion of 45th birth anniversary of Bharat Ratna, Dr. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel ji. The topic of today's program is Sardar Patel, a man of action. Honorable Director has very aptly chosen this topic because Sardar Patel was a man of conviction, which is a precondition for firm action. And we know that action speaks always louder than words. Millions of Indians under the leadership of Gandhiji envisioned a free nation. But this nation, this vision was actualized into reality with the firm action of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel in 1946-47. And till our country became independent on 15th August 1947, almost all the princely states comes under the umbrella of India, newly independent nation. Only 3 princely states were there, and which was also because of the firm action by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Junagadh and other states, that also Hyderabad, that also became part of India. The only issue remained was Kashmir, which was realized that on 5th August 2019, that also became an integral part of India after abolition of Article 370. So Sardar Patel united India when it was required the most. So on 26 January 1950, we implemented our constitution, and Article 1 of our constitution says that India, that is Bharat, shall be union of state. This could be a simple article for all of us, but it was a very Herculean task to realize, to actualize this line that India, that is Bharat, shall be union of state. And that was no one, that was the person, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who actualized this vision that India, that is Bharat, shall be union of state. This union was made possible with the efforts, with the Herculean efforts of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And today, the government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also working with the motto of Ek Bharat, Shresth Bharat. And he always says time to time that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel gave us Ek Bharat. Now we have to collectively make it Shresth Bharat. He always understood the importance of this political oneness, which was actualized by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And as Srishti ji mentioned, that Statue of Liberty, Statue of Unity was installed with the efforts of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and which is the tallest statue of the world in on 31st October 2018. And from 2014, Prime Minister has declared that 31st October would be celebrated as Rashtriya Ekta Divas, National Unity Day. And the official statement also says that this day will provide an opportunity to reaffirm the inherent strength and resilience of our nation to withstand the actual and potential threat to the unity, integrity, and security of the country. And to pass on, and it was this two initiative of Modi government signifies the importance of Sardar Patel in unifying India. And this was the due means since last 70 years we have seen that means our country was under the cloud of certain political leadership, and Sardar Patel was not given his due. Even he got Bharat Ratna after 40 years of his death. So modern India as a sum of alienable parts is the biggest legacy of Sardar Patel. So Sardar Patel, because of this Herculean task, is considered as Bismarck of India. And because of his iron will with which he integrated different parts of India, all the principal state, is also considered as Iron Man of India. With the help of his colleague, his one bureaucrat, VP Menon, a senior, he worked for unity of India, and we saw that when India became independent, almost all the princely states were part of newly created nation, India. He was also a great organizer and administrator because a man of action should be a good organizer too. When Gandhiji asked him to mobilize funds for his movement, any movement, either for the work of Harijans or for any civil disobedience movement, Sardar Patel was always there. And but if when he died, there were only two things which were inherited by Sardar Patel. One was his spectacle, another was his watch, and both the things were 30-year old. So I must say, for many, Sardar Patel was Iron Man. Iron Man. So for many, Sardar Patel was Bismarck of India, and Gandhiji called him Sardar after his movement, farmers' movement in Kheda, Bosad, and Bardoli. For me, Sardar Patel is philosopher king, as described by Plato in his book Republic, because he was having everything at his disposal. But when he died, he left nothing as legacy for his daughter Manibel. So for me, he's also philosopher king. And as I told you that he was a great organizer, so he started his political life with farmers movement in different parts of Kathiawar, Gujarat. In Kheda, in Borsad, in Bardoli, he organized farmers movement. He documented problems of each and every farmers of those villages, and then he started agitation. In Kheda Satyagraha, we know that Mahatma Gandhi also participated. And there, after seeing the leadership qualities of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, he called him Sardar, that he is the real Sardar. And he became darling of Gujarati people first. And in 1920, he became the first president of Gujarat Pradesh Congress Committee, where he served until 1925. He was also president of Karachi Convention of Congress, where we saw that many important resolutions were passed. And Sardar Patel was also chairman of Congress Parliamentary Board, where he played very important role. Where Congress decided that they will participate in election as a legislative election and parliamentary election. So he was as chairman of Congress Parliamentary Committee. He decided the candidates and he also funded candidates to contest election. And his journey as administrator started from grassroots. First, he became a municipal councillor in Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, and then he also became chairman of Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. And his administrative abilities were at display during this time when he managed the municipal affairs meticulously, focusing on sanitation, electrification, and education. And this administrative ability is again proven when he became Home Minister of India and during the time of partition, when in December 1946 and January 1947, Patel worked on the proposal for separate dominion of Pakistan, created of Muslim majority provinces, and where he played a very good kind of diplomacy, that where means Pakistan was demanding that whole Punjab and Bengal should become part of Pakistan. But because of the diplomacy and politics of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, we still have a big part of Punjab and Bengal with us. And we know that during partition, violence was happening in different part of India. Means there was a great displacement was taking place in different part of India and Pakistan. Patel, as Home Minister of India, He led from the front and he organized relief and established refugee camps and visiting border areas which were very disturbed and encouraged peace. But Sardar Patel also very significant contribution in Constituent Assembly, especially committee responsible for minorities, tribal and excluded areas. He was also chairman of for fundamental rights and provincial constitution. So I must say that in the last that one can imagine the importance of Sardar Patel by this statement, which is still reverberate in everyone's mind, that even after 70 years of his death, everyone says that if Patel would have been the Prime Minister of India, if Patel would have been the Prime Minister of India. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swardesh Singh, for those insightful remarks on Ekta Divas. Our next guest speaker joining us from India is Sri Ram Naresh Prasad Singh, a senior fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation in India. Sir is a senior fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation, a Delhi based think tank, a former officer of intelligence at a bureau, Government of India, and distinguished service credentials, which earned him the coveted President's Police Medal, Indian Police Medal, and the Sukriti and Kautilya Awards. We welcome Mr. R.N.P. Singh for his remarks today.
Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was acclaimed as the Iron Man of India and was a master strategist blessed with the uncanny foresight and a clear vision of where India's future lay. The greater part of his illustrious life was devoted to the struggle for freedom of the country, and once independence was won, he dedicated himself to the monumental task of integrating the 500-odd princely estates into the Union of India. The integration of these princely estates was a momentous challenge, not only in the history of modern India, but the which has not been witnessed or equaled in the history of any other nation. Vallabhbhai has been variously perceived by historians and contemporary analysts as a superman and a leader with superlative brains. He was none of that. What he was a statesman with the rare quality of astuteness and pertinacity in his approach to the problems. Despite his stern exterior, he possessed a generous heart, but in the pursuit of larger objectives, he never allowed emotions or sentiments to weaken his resolve. Vallabhbhai has won for himself a glittering page in history as an annexionist and unifier, far more resourceful and much bolder than Bismarck. Only a man of his resolute and persuasive abilities could have accomplished the unique feat of merging the 500-odd mutually exclusive and fiercely self-regarding principalities into India's wider unity. Sacrifices demanded from the princes were of staggering proportions, and yet a majority of them willingly surrendered their most cherished positions. It is not a small tribute to Patel's vision and the sagacity that even after he had stripped the rulers of their powers, the relations with them both individually and collectively were most cordial. The bloodless revolution representing the crowning achievement of his life was accomplished at a time when the armed forces of the government of India were dangerously inadequate to build up India of his dreams. Patel felt the need for an efficient and enthusiastic civil service. The ICS under the British Raj had earned renown for the ability and versatility of its members. But following the country's partition and independence in 1947, nearly 700 European and Muslim ICS officers out of a total of 1,150 had left. The burden of running the administration of a problem-ridden country fell upon a small number of officers. Patel was indeed the only senior Congress leader who only appreciated and admired their capabilities, but also won their confidence by fighting for their rights, privileges, and immunities. He realized that the problems of the country, which were of such heartbreaking complexity, could be dealt with effectively only with their expert assistance. After the exodus of large number of ICS and IP men, Patel constituted the Indian Administrative Service and Indian Police Service in its place, despite opposition from many state chief ministers to the creation of such an all-India cadre. Patel sternly discouraged their divisive tendencies and impressed upon them the need for an interchange of officers in order to preserve the unity, integrity, independence, impartiality, and the efficiency of administration throughout the country. Never before in India's history since Mauryan bureaucracy did India have a uniform system of administration from which no part of the country was excluded, nor was the country ever before unified as an unrestricted democracy. In spite of Patel being an unquestioned patriot, a statesman, visionary, and a unifier of modern India, dispassionate observers cannot help suspecting that there is almost a conspiracy of silence aimed at obliterating his memory. In certain circles, he is painted as a reactionary, communalist, and a Hindu nationalist. The book of his speeches, Sardar Patel on Indian Problems, has been out of print, and no attempt has been made to reprint it. The original publisher was Government of India. A commemorative volume published on his 75th birthday, containing extracts from his speeches and life sketches by admirers, had a limited circulation. In absence of availability of material, it has been difficult to satisfy the curiosity of the student of history about what Sardar was and what he achieved as a fighter for freedom, as a powerful organizer, and a great statesman. Some writers have thrown much mud at Sardar's memory. This needs to be cleared by presenting hard facts. Patel's personality will then stand out clear and radiant for future generations to make their own estimate of his contribution towards building the free nation which India is today. In the present political flux, thinking men more than ever mourn the absence of Patel's leadership, his clarity of thought, his robust sense of realism, his firmness in decision, his iron will, which none could bend, and they cannot help saying, had Patel been alive for some more years, India would not have seen such dismal days. After securing the accession of estates, Vallabhbhai Patel tightened his grip on the great movement which brought about their full integration with India. Patel decided that the best course would be to secure their merger into a union. He therefore explained to the rulers that the estates could no longer continue their separate existence. Like little pools of water, they had become stagnant. The transfer of power to the people had become inevitable. It was in the interest of the ruler that this should be effected in a peaceful manner. Then, from a realistic angle, he convinced them that the popular ministries were sure to vote for merger into a union of estates. He asked them, would it not be safer for the princes to agree to merger and thus safeguard their privy purses and their personal properties? The princes agreed. Like a magician, Patel picked up fragments of estates and from his basket produced compact and viable units. The map of India was changed completely. Out of 554 estates, 216 had merged in the provinces, 310 had been consolidated into 6 unions, 5 were put directly under center as Chief Commissioner's province, 21 Punjab hill estates formed Himachal Pradesh, and 2 estates were made into separate provinces. The 554 estates were thus reduced to 14 unions and estates. The administrative consolidation of these estates and unions, which varied much in their structure, was undertaken by loaning experienced officers to the unions. The state forces were integrated in the Indian Army. This process was completed by the Constitution of India, which came into force on 26 January 1950. The country has a reason to be grateful to Sardar Patel, who laid the foundation of integrated India, wherein regional loyalties were overshadowed by the desire to build a strong and united nations. By partition, India had lost 3.6 lakh square miles of territory with a population of 1.5 million. By the integration of states, she acquired 5 lakh square miles of territory with a population of 86.5 million. Artificial barriers between the states and the rest of India were demolished. Almost overnight, the superstructure of modern system of government was introduced in these states. The Sardar performed a miracle. In his own words, quote, "The great idea of geographical, political, and economic unification of India, an ideal for centuries, remained a distant dream, which appeared as a remote and as difficult of attainment even after the advent of Indian independence was consummated by the policy of integration. However, he was too much of a realist to ignore that the real integration had still to take place in the minds of the people. He said, quote, "We have to weave new fabrics into old materials. We have to make sure that simultaneously the old and the new are integrated into a harmonious whole, a design that would fit well into the pattern of all India." Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ram Naresh Prasad Singh, for those very deep, insightful remarks on Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel.
The 15th of December 1950, Bombay. The death of Sardar Patel. For over 30 years, he fought and worked for freedom, for the unity and well-being of his people.
There have been born leaders, and there have been leaders by chance, by wealth, and by luck. This peasant patriot was a leader by merit. His life was a gospel of devotion, determination, defiance, and dauntlessness. Diligence was his choice, discipline his creed.
On one of his birthdays, Vallabhbhai Patel said,
"I am extremely touched by the affection that you have shown. I have said things, some of which may be harsh, but however bitter they may be, they are a perfect dose of medicine that I give you."
Vallabhbhai was born in 1875. He went to the primary school at Karamsad and learnt the 3 R's. After finishing school at Nadiad, he burnt the midnight oil to make something of himself. He eventually became a lawyer after studying with borrowed books.
पिताजी ने गोधरा में वकीलात शुरू की। 2 साल में वहाँ से
His daughter Maniben recalls that although he wanted to go to England himself, he stood down in favor of his elder brother Vittalbhai. Indeed, he paid his brother's expenses with the money he had saved for his own trip.
पिताजी मान गए और उनका वहाँ का सारा खर्चा का बोझ आपने उठा लिया। कोर्ट में एक केस चला रहे थे जिसमें फांसी की सजा होने का संभव था। तब माता के देहांत का
While he was pleading for a man accused of murder, Vallabhbhai received a telegram informing him of his wife's death. He put the telegram in his pocket and continued with the case. In his own words, "One life has gone, let me save another." The man was acquitted. When his brother returned from England, it was time for Vallabhbhai to go. While he was in London, another lawyer, M.K. Gandhi, in South Africa, was questioning the moral basis of the existence of man in the 20th century. Vallabhbhai returned to India in 1913 and set up practice in Ahmedabad. He was utterly unconcerned with the political activities of the Indian leaders. Then came Gandhi. In 1915, Gandhi addressed members of the Gujarat Club. Sardar Patel, barrister at law, was playing bridge at the club. He refused to listen to what to him was a lot of idealistic hot air and continued with his game. But then an odd thing happened. In 1918, a devastating flood had destroyed 75% of the total crop of Khera district in Gujarat, but the government was adamant in collection of taxes. Then Gandhi decided to launch a satyagraha. In that situation, Vallabhbhai realized that Gandhi was a man of action. He gave up his practice and volunteered to work for the cause. In the words of Gandhi, "If Vallabhbhai had not been with me, the satyagraha would not have succeeded." In 1919, Britain enacted the infamous Rowlatt Act, which provided for arrest and trial without due process of law. Gandhi appealed to the entire nation to demonstrate peacefully against this violation of fundamental rights. At Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar, without any provocation, troops opened fire on a peaceful crowd, killing and wounding hundreds of men, women and children. The freedom movement was now intensified. In 1920, Gandhi gave a call for a countrywide non-cooperation movement and boycott of all foreign goods. The spinning wheel became the symbol of the struggle for freedom. Like many other congressmen, Vallabhbhai now began to wear homespun khadi. Carrying of the Congress flag was banned by the British in Nagpur. Vittalbhai and Vallabhbhai went to Nagpur and led the flag satyagraha, which was a roaring success. It was a bad decade for the farmer. The 20s saw falling prices and diminishing returns. The Raj, however, was implacable in its demand for increased revenue. The poor peasants of Bardoli petitioned government for relief. Their imploration met the proverbial deaf ear. But there was one person willing to listen, Vallabhbhai Patel. He organized the Bardoli Satyagraha after having warned the people that they must be prepared to make sacrifices. Thousands of villagers volunteered to follow him. Many of them went to jail. In spite of intimidation, in spite of confiscation of land, of cattle, and even pots and pans, the peasants stood by Vallabhbhai's leadership in this satyagraha. Drums would warn the people, and officials would arrive to find deserted streets and closed doors. For 9 months, a tense nation watched this dramatic war of attrition. In the words of K.M. Munshi,
it was a great experience for me when I saw Sardar leading the 80,000 Bardoli peasants into a grim struggle of limitless courage.
The movement was successful. The government reverted to the old revenue rates and ordered an inquiry. It was from the time of the Bardoli Satyagraha that Vallabhbhai Patel came to be known as the Sardar, the leader. He traveled to various parts of the country and took up the cause of the farmer. Mahatma Gandhi now had a brilliant array of lieutenants. In 1928, the All-British Simon Commission came to India to recommend constitutional changes. The exclusion of Indians in a matter so important infuriated the nation. The Congress decided to boycott the commission. In a peaceful demonstration, Lala Lajpat Rai, the Lion of Punjab, was brutally beaten and he died of his injuries. All of India was grieved and indignant. The will to freedom was strengthened. As the midnight hour of 1929 passed into history and 1930 was being born, the Lahore Congress resolved to fight for complete independence. When the demand for complete independence fell on deaf ears, Gandhi decided to break the salt law as a symbolic act of defiance. Sardar Patel was given the task of going over the route of the march from Ahmedabad to Dandi to enlighten the people. He was arrested at Ras and thrown into Sabarmati prison. He missed Gandhi's epic march to Dandi. In 1931, Sardar Patel was elected president of the Karachi Congress. In that year, Gandhi went to London to attend the Round Table Conference. It was a failure. At home, repression against the peasants was intensified. On his return, both Guru and Chela were sent to Yeravda jail. When he heard that government was selling off the Bardoli ashram, Vallabhbhai humorously said, "I suppose it's a fair exchange. After all, we've taken possession of their jail." Although he retained his sense of humor, Sardar Patel was now a sick man. During his detention, he had lost his beloved mother and elder brother Vittalbhai. In 1936, the Congress decided to contest the elections to the provincial legislatures. Sardar Patel was chairman of the subcommittee to select candidates. The Congress came to power in 10 provinces, thus showing that it had an abiding place in the hearts of the people. When Britain declared war on Germany, the Viceroy dragged India into the war by issuing an ordinance without consulting any Indian leaders. The Congress wanted to support Britain on one condition, that if the war was being fought for democracy and freedom, that freedom should extend to India at the end of the war. The Secretary of State loftily said that India must first show her fitness for dominion status. All the Congress ministries resigned, and leaders called upon the people not to support Britain's war effort. As the Japanese approached the Indian border in 1942, Roosevelt prevailed upon Churchill to seek a solution to the Indian problem. Sir Stafford Cripps brought to India proposals for an interim government, vaguely promising independence at an unspecified time in the future. The Congress flatly rejected these proposals, designed to continue Britain's imperial stranglehold on India. On the 8th of August 1942, the now famous Quit India resolution was passed by the Congress in Bombay. Speaking on the resolution, Sardar Patel said that India could not tolerate slavery anymore. Mahatma Gandhi clarified the Indian stand. Our quarrel is not with the British people. We fight their policy. The very same night, all national leaders were arrested. Sardar Patel was among those taken to the Ahmednagar fort. The British could and did physically lock up Mahatma Gandhi and his colleagues, but not their ideas. An apparently leaderless nation continued Gandhi's non-violent war. Reprisals followed. More than 1,000 people were shot dead and more than 3,000 grievously injured. Over 100,000 people went to jail. Never in history had there been mass civil disobedience on such a scale. When the war in Europe ended, all national leaders were released. They were invited to Simla by the Viceroy, Lord Wavell, to discuss constitutional changes. Unfortunately, the parleys broke down because of differences between the Congress and the Muslim League. But events were moving fast. When Japan surrendered, the Labour government announced that elections to central and provincial legislatures would be held. The Congress won an overwhelming majority in the Central Assembly and in 8 provinces. A cabinet mission composed of Lord Pethick Lawrence, Sir Stafford Cripps and Mr. A.V. Alexander came to negotiate an agreement for the transfer of power. The agreement had to be acceptable to all political parties. The bitter rift between the Muslim League and the Congress could not be bridged. The cabinet mission proposed its own solution. A constituent assembly came into being and an interim government was formed headed by Jawaharlal Nehru. Sardar Patel was in charge of Home Affairs and Information and Broadcasting. Eventually, the Muslim League joined the interim government with Liaquat Ali Khan in charge of finance. But the Muslim League continued to agitate for the creation of Pakistan. There were communal riots all over the country. Partition became inevitable. Lord Mountbatten was the new viceroy. It was decided by all the parties concerned that transfer of power would take place on August the 15th, 1947, to 2 independent dominions. In independent India's first government, Sardar Patel became the Home Minister. He was faced with a tremendous law and order problem and the problem of millions of refugees escaping from Pakistan. In his own words,
let us get on with the job in the hope that we will do it well, and the faith that despite the shock which the whole organization has received from the recent disturbances, we shall acquit ourselves creditably in one of the great rescue projects of history.
Sardar Patel now set out to integrate over 500 princely states into the Indian Union.
लेकिन ये छोटे छोटे जो वाड़े हैं उससे बहुत नुकसान होता है और जिस चीज से मुल्क को फायदा नहीं होता है इस चीज से आकर
All our hearts should be filled with the thought of a united India.
हमें
After centuries, we have the freedom to forge a unified
और
nation.
एक मौका मिला है और एक अवसर हमारे पास आया है वो घुमाना नहीं चाहिए.
The integration of princely states was perhaps the greatest achievement in the life of Sardar Patel. The assassination of the Mahatma was a blow to every Indian, but especially to those who were close to him. Grieved as he was, Sardar urged the people of India not to shed tears.
Our next guest speaker joining us from India is Dr. Arvind Gupta. Sir is the director at the Vivekananda International Foundation in Delhi. Dr. Gupta belongs to the 1979 batch of the Indian Foreign Service. Over the course of his career, he has served in various capacities at the Indian diplomatic missions in Moscow, London, and Ankara. He has joined the National Security Council and Secretariat shortly after it was set up in 1998 and served there until 2007. We welcome Dr. Arvind Gupta for his remarks today.
Namaskar. First of all, my grateful thanks to Dr. Yogi for organizing this discussion and inviting me to participate in it. I also listened very carefully and with great benefit the two presentations before me, and that of RNP Singh ji and Sudesh Singh ji. And I must say that I learned a lot from them. In fact, I've been reading RNP Singh ji's book last 2 days just to refresh my memory. And if I had known that he was coming, then I would have probably read some other book because his book is so comprehensive that I didn't need to read anything else. But I think what he said and what Sudesh Singh ji said must set us thinking about India, where we are today, and how did it happen. I think that is the tribute that we can pay to him. The contribution of Sardar to making India what we are today. As we all know, India today is the 5th largest economy in the world. It has a very high international status. It has a very active diplomacy. It's a thriving democracy. We have now almost 27 states, so many union territories. And even today, the problems that we inherited in 1947, some of them are continuing. And I was just wondering if had Sardar Patel not integrated India so quickly, almost looks so effortlessly, without bloodshed, almost without use of force, except in a couple of occasions, where would we have been? We would have as RMP Singh ji said, there were so many forces who were working against the unity of India at that time. Nobody really thought that 1947 India would remain integral for a long time, because all the problems of integration were very much there in 1947, and they were all resolved within probably a year or less than that, except perhaps one problem that we are facing, but that is again not because the integration of Jammu and Kashmir did not take place, but some people played mischief, and we committed some blunders. Apart from that, we are a united and a strong country, and the credit goes to Sardar. But just imagine if Hyderabad had also created a problem, if Junagadh also were unsettled, if some of these states, as RNP Singh's book tells us, how the Nawab of Bhopal was trying to organize some states and trying to have his own, another organization. Our federalism would have been a very defective federalism, and that would have created enormous problems. As it is in 1947, we had the communal situation was very bad, and Sardar was handling that, and he handled it so well. And if any of these other problems had lingered on, India would not have reached where we are today. So I think we must be most grateful to this man. And as was said by RNP Singh ji and also Sudesh Singh ji, that his memory is not been honored properly. And the first thing that we can do is to know more about the person. More documentation is required, more research is required. And today there is enough distance, from 1947, we can take a far more objective view of things than earlier. So I think on the Unity Day, this is one resolve we should have, that we should have more and more research about Sardar Patel and what he did. Of course, by building the Statue of Unity, and with Prime Minister himself inaugurating it, and Prime Minister compared him with Kautilya and Shivaji in his 2018 speech. That brought out some very interesting attributes of his character. Kautilya, not because, of course, he was a strategist, but more because it was during Kautilya's time that India was one, the first time it was integrated, and then now. So this is really 2000 years we had to wait. And Shivaji, of course, because of the man of action, and how he fought, Shivaji fought, and the Mughals, and brought that sense of unity. So I think these are certainly very, very important attributes. But I think we should speak about a couple of more attributes of Sardar Patel, which are equally important. One was, and I'm talking of in the context of independent India. One was that he had a view on the social and economic problems of the country as well. And particularly on the economic side, if you read his speeches or see his correspondence, he knew very well that without economic development, India's independence will not mean very much. And India will have to face these economic problems. But what is the model that needed to be adopted? And I think the differences between him and Nehru had gone on for since the mid-30s, when Nehru had started talking about socialism, and he was not in favor of socialism. And in 1947 afterwards, although he was the Home Minister, but he was also the Deputy Prime Minister, and he was a tall Congress leader, and he was involved in almost all aspects of governance. So many times he spoke about what model, economic model should India adopt. And he was very clear in his mind that there ought to be a partnership between labor and capital for India to grow. And he was, of course, a disciple of Gandhiji, and he had great faith in rural development, village industries. and Swadeshi. Now, see, all these ideas are now coming back to us, and they are very important. We have, of course, in 1991, we went for opening up, and the importance of capital was realized. And now we are also having major reforms in labor. We are having major reforms in agriculture. We have a program of Atmanirbhar Bharat. All these new ideas and reform ideas that are coming up, these were being talked about in some shape or the other, even during the 50s. And Sardar Patel had a lot to say about these things. And I think the most important thing that he said, and he was equally harsh to both capital and labor when they found that they were not acting in a patriotic sense. So patriotism was important, nationalism was very important, but at the same time, just as he, convinced the princess, and by both using incentives, he was very polite, and at the same time, he was very firm, and he also told them, look, if you do not integrate with India, then what awaits you? But if you integrate, then there are all the benefits. Likewise, I think labor-capital relationship, he had a lot to say, and he wanted both of them to come together. And I think this is the need of the hour also. So that's one aspect I think we should also talk about. Another aspect which is not spoken very often is that of the foreign policy. And of course, in R.N.P. Singh's book and other places also, the famous letter that he wrote to Nehru on China, on Tibet, and on the northern borders, the dangers to India's sovereignty and territorial integrity coming out of from the north. He also commented on Commonwealth. He commented on Nepal, situation in Nepal, when the Raja was sought refuge in the Indian embassy. And he was very critical of some of Nehru's policies, particularly on Tibet and China. Now, all this, I think, again, it's coming back to us today. Where are we? Look at the Sino-Indian military standoff. And he had warned way back in 1950 that what China says you cannot really take on face value. They profess friendship, but are they really? Their actions don't seem to suggest. And India and China's occupation of Tibet created a huge, massive security problems for India. He used to correspond with the ambassadors and high commissioners directly also. So he took interest in all aspects of governance. And I must say that despite the fact that despite the differences between Nehru and Patel on so many issues, I think both had a healthy regard also for each other. And that is also that needs to be appreciated. For instance, I think I read it in Mr. R.P. Singh's book only, Nehru's tribute to Patel, and he called him the builder of modern India because of his role in integrating. I think Patel was a man of many parts. He was a strategist. He could think very clearly. He was also a very practical man. I read somewhere that he was amongst the first persons in the Congress who saw the inevitability of the partition, though he did not like it. But yet he realized that we have to now prepare for the partition, and the partition will bring many problems. And the integration was one of them. The communal problem was another problem, and advance action had to be taken. And I was reading that he was the one who started talking to Nehru and Maulana Azad and others, and even Gandhi, about the problems of partition and the inevitability. And that is how Congress moved towards acceptance of partition. So I think he was a clear-headed person and unemotional, sense that if there was an inevitability, you better be ready for it. At the same time, I think he was a visionary, and he could see very clearly what suited India, what did not suit India. So yes, he lived only 3 years after India's independence. His contribution in those years has been tremendous. And today, when we speak, I think it's because he was the one who united India. And united India in an episode which probably has never occurred anywhere in the world at the same scale. A reference was made to Bismarck, but I think he was greater than Bismarck because Bismarck united Germany, and it was a small country and small, some 40 principalities. But here there were 566 principalities, very different from each other. And how he must have dealt with the British, who were all against a united India, his own colleagues who were not very clear what was happening. And then, of course, the princes. You see, at that point of time, in hindsight, it all looks very nice. And to see that, yes, there was this cabinet mission plan, and then people, accepted, did not accept, or said something. But actually, when it came, and the partition plan was announced, it had to be implemented within, I think, 6 weeks. Mountbatten announced it only in somewhere in June, and in August you are free. I mean, that was also, I think, a perfidy almost with the British, because they had said 1948. Earlier, the date was 1948, and they fast forwarded in 1947, created many problems. But I think Sardar Patel was up to the task, and I think our nation owes it to him. And today, if we had to talk about an idea of India, a strong India, a rising India, India which is at the cusp of greatness and recovering the great India, the India of Vivekananda's conception. And I think the hard work and the tool work was done really by Sardar Patel, and we should be most grateful. So thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arvind Gupta, for your insightful remarks today. Our next guest speaker joining us from India is Professor Bimal N. Patel. So he's a professor of public international law and vice chancellor of the Rashtriya Raksha Shakti University, Gandhinagar, Gujarat, India. Dr. Bimal N. Patel is also a member of the National Security Advisory Board of India and was the former director of the Gujarat National Law University for 2 consecutive terms. He was appointed by a high-level committee headed by then Chief Justice of India, K.G. Balakrishnan, at the Supreme Court of India premises. We welcome Professor Bimal N. Patel for his remarks.
Trust. Patel perfectly envisaged that the unity project has to get over in few years' time. Otherwise, the threat to India's national unity and security will mount. In hindsight, few states which become part of the India later precisely proved this. Sardar Patel, by ensuring that all princely states become part of Indian nation, a solid structure, the intrinsic aspirations, tensions, and limitations will automatically contribute and ensure stability of the new nation. Although hence foreign policy was the portfolio of the Prime Minister Nehru, Sardar Patel envisaged that Indian nation will be never having an ambition of threatening independence of or existence of other nations. Obviously, that when India of a stature and size was to arrive, this was the most important concern for the neighbors. But at the same time, large and stable India would be required for India to use her inner strength and stability to project her legitimate position in the community of nations. By creating a strong and united India, Sardar Patel made sure that the Indian nation would never tempt an adversary to raise its terms under any circumstances. He was actually and acutely aware that in the unification process, military plans have to be prepared simultaneously. Unlike diplomacy, where the diplomatic agencies can afford leisure of its space, since speed would determine the result, especially under intense time pressure which prevailed then. Sardar Patel executed those plans in a masterful manner. He perfectly knew that if he would procrastinate in mobilization, he would lose the popular expectations of the country and enable the enemy to obtain certain gains. Defeat was out of his dictionary. For financial and economic consequences of defeat, although could be hardly calculated on enforcing as a newly independent nation, ill affordable, and therefore the unification plan had to be executed fast, forward, and focused manner. He realized that a strong and united India would enter the global affairs with confidence, power, and idealism, representing the voices of hundreds of millions of Indians and the civilizational value. He knew a strong and united India will be able to bargain successfully tangible guarantees which later during the decolonization process happened precisely. A strong and united India which can guarantee and stand strong for preserving and promoting the ideals of the United Nations Charter can be the one who can play a meaningful role in balance of power and psychologically create a moral equilibrium too. Sardar Patel, in my view, was a leader of clarity and incisiveness, was respected but also feared. As the Home Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, he knew that if he is confused in the thousands of things happening at the same time, then he would fall a trap to substitute public relations maneuver for a sense of direction. Thus, his qualities raised tall and large above all these. As an Iron Man or unifying leader of India, Sardar Patel was aware of the fine balance between the scope of action versus having all knowledge about outcome of means and moves. Because if he would have waited for gaining all knowledge, tried to learn public relations exercises, the decisive action scope would have receded and perhaps it would have adversely impacted his ability in the unification process. Friends, if unity, freedom, and security principles were principles like algebra, his project was a perfect epitome of practical arithmetic. Looking back 75 years, one can clearly see Sardar Patel created a society, India, which has enormous confidence in its achievements and whose population has confidence for its future. The country which had mustered the dedication and the resources to strive for a world order in which enemies, allies, and adversaries all listen to the voice of India. By creating a strong and secure India, he ensured that no powerful neighbor or distant country can think of any intervention in Indian affairs. As a student of international law, I believe that Sardar Patel's project, Unity, in the immediate wake of independence, had excellent blend of various theories of international relations, which often are supported by international law or influence the development of international law, which essentially was to preserve and protect the needs, interests, and concerns of an individual state, till the universality principles are able to guarantee peace and prosperity to every individual of the globe. It is an apt contribution that on 31st October, India and Indians wherever they are celebrate the achievement of Sardar Patel for the unified India, for the strong and secure India, which, as we all know, has entered the 20th century with confidence, with stature and the size, with peaceful intentions and avowed goals to contribute to peace and stability in the immediate region, but also for the whole globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Patel, for those very knowledgeable remarks on the occasion of Sardar Vallabhbhai Jayanti. We really appreciate it, sir. And thank you so much for taking on time of your schedule. I know you just had another engagement and you quickly had to log on to join for us. Thank you so much, sir. We look forward in welcoming you again in future programs. We've come to the conclusion of today's program, and on behalf of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, I would like to express deep gratitude to our guest speakers for joining us and taking our time of your schedules for giving us those deep, insightful remarks. And our guest speakers are Dr. Swadesh Singh, Shri Ram Naresh Prasad Singh, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Professor Bimal N. Patel. We'd also like to say thank you to Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Mr. Piyush Khandelwal, distinguished guests. Thank you so much for showing your contribution in watching today's program. Please stay tuned to SVCC social media pages for what's happening next. Namaskar.